here we go. So the first thing to mention is that if you do find this lesson useful, as always, please feel free to contact Chan to arrange a free one-to-one assessment and any further lessons if you would like. The resources that I use for the masterclass are all available both online on our website as well as via our WeChat channel. But if you are having trouble finding them, just ask Chan and she'll be able to share them with you. So with that out of the way, let's get started with our lesson today, understanding Shakespeare's language and culture. So a few key points first to understand for Shakespeare's life. He lived between 1564 to 1616. He went to a public school where he learned Latin and scriptures and logic. This was quite unusual for the time, as not every student was educated, was literate, was able to read and write, and certainly it was only boys who were taught for the most part. Some young women were educated, especially if they were highborn, but for the most part it would be men, and it'd have to be men from rich families, from families who could afford to send their children to school, whereas William Shakespeare's family when he was growing up weren't particularly rich. And then from that point on, not a lot is known about Shakespeare. There are a few different theories for how he became interested in theatre and how he became a playwright. One, that he saw a play at Warwick Castle with part of the monarch's pageantry, and then became really interested in plays in that way. Another, that he ran away to London and became a stable hand looking after the horses of theatregoers. Another, that he became a teacher. Another, that he went to Italy. So there's a few different theories. We're not entirely sure what happened to him as a young man. The first reference we have from him after going to school is as a young upstart crow, which is the description given to him by a critic of his first plays in this magazine, Green's Groatsworth of Wit, which is essentially a review of plays at the time. His son, Hamlet, one of 3 children, contracted the Black Plague and died at age 11 in 1596, and we know that this certainly would have had a very strong impact on Shakespeare's mental health, and we can see different references to this in his plays. So when he talks about how the death of children is perhaps the worst thing that a parent can endure, we know that he's speaking from personal experience. Or when he has the character named Hamlet, the name is so similar to Hamlet that we know that there must be a reference there for a particular reason, and that he's named his most famous character after his son, perhaps as a way to memorialize him. Okay, Shakespeare's company performed often for Queen Elizabeth I. They were very popular with both monarchs. The point to note here is that if you are studying a play that was written and performed before 1603, you should be talking about an Elizabethan audience, because the audience that went to go see that play would have been called Elizabethan because they were during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Whereas if you are talking about a play performed after 1603, or written and performed after 1603, then you're talking about a Jacobean audience. So after Queen Elizabeth's death, then James I, the new king, came into power, and Shakespeare's company was just as popular with King James I, and they became known as the King's Men. And lastly, he died in 1616 at age 52. Once again, a few different ideas about how he died, a few different theories. One, that he was poisoned. One, that he may have committed suicide. We don't know entirely how he died. We do know that this is his tomb inscription, where he is buried, which is essentially saying, don't move my bones, don't mess with my grave, and that you're blessed if you leave my grave alone, cursed if you decide to try and move or mess with my grave. Okay, so that's a little summary of who Shakespeare was. Important just to know those basic facts for when you're talking about his plays, because it might be that you'll bring in his life into the analysis of the play. So we're going to take a look at some rather basic elements of Shakespearean language. First, we're going to talk about general points, biblical language, and then rhythm. And then afterwards, we'll talk about some catch-all tips and techniques for when you're analyzing Shakespeare, for things like quotes, talking about it in exams, talking about it in essays, etc. But first, just some general points that you should be aware of. Shakespeare's work is written in early modern English. This means that it is the closest version of our modern English. So it is comprehensible for us. If you are reading Chaucer, or if you're reading Beowulf, then these are much older versions of English, and they are very distinct. They're kind of more of a mix of Old Norse and German and a few other different dialects, whereas early modern English we can understand. Just a few words which some students struggle with, which I've often had to teach throughout my career as an English teacher. Thee and thou, this just means it's a politer form of you. We don't use it anymore in English, we just use you as addressing somebody else. Whereas in other languages, you could find two distinct versions. If you speak French or you know French, then you know that you have tu, which is you, but you also have vous, which is a more formal, more polite version of you. It can also be you plural, you guys, essentially. In English, we used to have the same thing. Thee and thou would be our version of vous, would be a politer version of saying you, whereas you is a bit like tu. It's the more direct version for addressing someone. And thy and thine are related to this. They just mean you, your and yours, basically. So these two are quite well related to each other. And the other two here we have are basically about apostrophes replacing letters. So this is pronounced and in this case it means over. The letter V is replaced by the apostrophe in over. So a hill and a mountain just means over hill and over mountain. And then here we have as well near, which just means never. So the apostrophe has also replaced the V here. If ever you're seeing words like this in Shakespeare, where there's an apostrophe in the middle, it means that the apostrophe replaces a letter, and you just need to think, oh, what could that letter be? What would the word look like otherwise? And then you'll understand what the word is. Sirrah means boy, and you'd use it to address somebody who's more junior than you or of a lower rank than you, a male person who's of a lower rank than you. Hither means here, so come hither means come here. Hie means go. There's a line in Romeo and Juliet where she's told to hie thee to a nunnery, which means go to a nunnery, go to a convent where nuns live. Doth means does. Verily means truly. This shows the relationship with French, because you've got vérité, truth. And perchance means maybe, which is perhaps an easier one to remember than the others, because it means by chance, so maybe. Okay, so these are some general points to be aware of for the Shakespearean language, just so that when you are reading the text, when you are reading the play, that you do not struggle with some of these basic terms, these basic words. Okay, so let us move on then to our next point, which would be biblical language. So it's important to understand that religion was extremely important in Shakespeare's time. So in the 1500s to the 1600s, the Sunday church service, going to church on Sundays, was compulsory. Everybody had to go. You were fined. You were fined quite a sizable amount if you were absent and you didn't attend. And godliness was next to goodliness, basically. If someone was devout and very religious, then in society people would speak well of them. Whereas if you weren't very religious, if you were of a different religion perhaps than Christianity, and if you were atheist, then people didn't approve of you. You would be mocked, but also you would be disapproved of by society. Okay, and this means that the Bible is something that everybody knows because they've been to church all their life. They know all the stories from the Bible, which means that Shakespeare uses many ideas, many images from the Bible because he knows the audience will understand them. So a great use of biblical language and a good one to point out in a play, in your analysis of a play. And if you can refer to how the audience would understand that image, even better. So just a few key points here. These are some of the most common biblical images that Shakespeare uses. So God and the devil, the serpent, angels and demons, innocence and guilt, violence and peace, and you've got quotes here for each of one of them. I'm not going to read them out. Okay, and I suppose another central theme is this idea that good eventually triumphs over evil, which is another theme of the Bible, and it's certainly a key point for lots of Shakespeare's plays as well. Okay, we're going to move on now to rhythm. Now, rhythm, there's essentially two that you really need to be aware of. Often I will warn students against analysis of rhythm because there's so much else that you could be talking about in order to get your marks in an essay or an exam. And rhythm is sometimes a bit tricky for people to talk about, both in poetry and also in Shakespeare. But if you are musically gifted, and if you enjoy rhythm and you can see this in the wording, then by all means, please do. But you should at least know what these terms mean and the theory behind it. But don't feel concerned or worried that you can't spot it or you can't hear it. Even most English speakers, even teachers of Shakespeare, even people who study Shakespeare, it takes them a little bit of time to be able to analyze the rhythm and be able to hear it easily, especially if you don't have a musical background. Okay, so preferred rhythm by Shakespeare is something called iambic pentameter. It's essentially 5 iambs in a single line of the play. An iamb is essentially a pair of syllables. The first is unstressed, the second is stressed. Da, dum. Now, in case you're wondering about the stressing and unstressing of syllables, it can be useful to take a look at an example. Here we have the same word, but it's 2 syllables, pre and zent. If you stress one and not the other, then it sounds different. And if you reverse that stress, it also sounds different. So for instance, present, you're stressing the second syllable, and it is a gift. Whereas if you say present, you're stressing the first syllable, you're talking about giving a presentation for something. I found that when teaching this, that a good way to think about it is if you have a 2-syllable name, then try stressing the other syllable and you'll begin to understand, oh, that sounds a bit funny, and you'll see how words are stressed. Okay, so this is an iamb. It is a pair of syllables. The first one is unstressed, the second stressed, and a line of iambic pentameter has to have 5 iambs. Here is a line to explain. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks. It's a line from Romeo and Juliet, and you can see here the words which are capitalized show the syllable stress. You'll notice that it doesn't go by word, it goes by syllables. So for instance, yonder window, or you might have, so if you have a 2-syllable word, one could be stressed and the other unstressed. Okay, now iambic pentameter is usually spoken by the good characters in a story. It's usually been spoken by the nobles and protagonists, whereas this other one that we're going to look at, trochaic tetrameter, is usually spoken by supernatural creatures, by the bad people in stories. So to give you an example, Romeo and Juliet tend to speak in iambic pentameter. Apart from when they're meeting for the first time, they talk in like a love sonnet. King Lear, any kings, queens, nobles will speak in iambic pentameter. It kind of reflects that they're interesting or important people and that we should listen to what they have to say. Whereas supernatural creatures like the witches in Macbeth, Puck or the fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream, they all speak in trochaic tetrameter. Now what is this? It is 4 trochees. A trochee is the opposite of an iamb. It is a pair of syllables, but the syllable stress goes the other way around. So the first is stressed and the second is unstressed. And there's 4 of them instead of 5. So here we have a line from Macbeth, double, double, toil and trouble, which is the witches. And you can see that in this case, it is the first syllable that gets stressed, the second one unstressed. In general, this is the natural rhythm that we speak in for English. This one sounds kind of like a chant. It sounds kind of like something people are singing, and it kind of has that emphasis on it. So it's like casting a spell. Okay, let us move on and take a look at some other elements. Okay, now I'm going to minimize this so you can see the screen a little bit more clearly. Shakespeare's language, here's some key tips that you should be aware of if you're studying a play for Shakespeare. First of all, I would say look up online a list of key vocabulary, because you'll find that each play will probably have some key words that get repeated in it, and you want to be able to understand them so that you can use them actively in your writing and discuss them more easily. So for Macbeth, this would be, for instance, witches, thane, betrayal, things like that. Whereas here's a good summary of them generally from different plays. This applies to nearly all plays. Of course, if it's a Jacobean play, you would be talking about Jacobean instead of Elizabethan. But this is a good idea. So whatever play you're doing, just look up a list of key vocabulary. You'll find a list online pretty easily. Just copy them down, make sure you understand what they mean, and just practice using them in your speech and your writing. Next point is when you're doing quotes, when you're memorizing quotes to use for your points, try and shorten them as much as possible. If you have a long line of the play to quote, then it slows you down, it slows down your writing. It's also more for you to have to remember, which isn't particularly pleasant. And I would recommend that you do it in this manner here. So try and shorten it to 2 to 3 words maximum. And once you've done that, I would have a think about what do those particular words represent, how can you link it to the themes of the play, what connotations, what ideas or feelings do they create. Okay, another one is you should watch the plays being performed. They're designed to be performed. They're not designed just for you to read. I know that that's how we study them in English, but definitely you want to try and watch them either online or at the theatre. Lots of plays by Shakespeare are available for free online via YouTube. You can also purchase some of the film versions of them online as well and rent them so you can watch them. Okay, and lastly, probably my best tip is if you have your own copy of the play, if you don't, you can print one out. Make notes in the margins regarding any key information and vocabulary as you read it through in class or as you read it through to revise. One of the best revision resources possible, because then you can just flip back and forth. So I would say do it like this, basically. Underline key bits. Make sure you note down, what techniques are being used, what kind of feelings are being created, why is this happening, how will the audience react to them. That is the best way you can revise for it, and then you can use it to write your essay answers and also to practice writing exam responses. Okay, so let's move on now. We've done Shakespeare's language. We're going to take a little look at Shakespeare's culture. So 2 key ideas that you definitely want to know would be these 2. Now, society during Shakespeare's time was intensely hierarchical, more so than nowadays. I mean, nowadays we still have this idea of a hierarchy in society of where you have, working class, middle class, or in the UK at least you have working class, middle class, upper class. And then you also have the monarchy above them. But nowadays, in the modern era, it's much more loose. The idea that you could travel from one class to the other is much more common. You could be born working class, make a lot of money, buy your own estate, and then become upper class, or you could marry into upper class. For instance, to give you an example, a member of the monarchy marrying a working class woman nowadays is possible. In fact, it has even happened. But in this time, in Shakespeare's time, during the Elizabethan or the Jacobean era, that would certainly not be possible. People were very much restricted by their class. You couldn't move so easily between the classes. And if you did marry outside your class, then you would be disapproved of for it. You would be, people would speak about it behind your back, and they would call it either marrying up or marrying down. So, two key ideas that you should be aware of that reflect how hierarchical Shakespeare's society would have been are the great chain of being and the divine right of kings. So we'll take them one by one and go through them in a little bit of detail. The great chain of being is the idea that all things, all living and unliving creatures, from God down to the lowest forms of life, are ordered and they are ranked, and that this order keeps the universe stable, keeps existence going, stops anything from being disrupted. So you have an artist's representation here of how the great chain of being shows a divinely inspired universal hierarchy or ladder, all forms of life ranked between heaven and hell. So at the top you've got God, all of his angels, then you've got people, then at the bottom you can see these plants here, and then you've got the elements, and then you've got hell underneath as well. If you really want a full list, then you can take a look here for how people would be ranked according to the great chain of being. You can see that God and angels and kings and queens. What may make you laugh is the idea that actors are in fact ranked lower than beggars. This is because there's something people find, even though Shakespeare's plays are very popular, and even though plays are very popular, the idea of dressing up and going on stage, especially being a man dressing up as a woman and going on stage, made people disapprove of actors very strongly. There was a sense that they thought that all actors had to be very vain or had to be very sentimental, or in many cases they also thought most actors were homosexual, and there was a lot of stigma attached to that. So actors were generally mocked and made fun of, even though people enjoyed plays. And then you can see at the very bottom you've got plants, rocks, and minerals. Now, belief in this great chain of being kind of also creates this idea of the divine right of kings, which is that the kings and queens, the monarchs, are the first of the human people. They are the most important of humans, because if God and the angels, if God has chosen how the world works, which he must have done, then he also chose for kings and queens to be the leaders, to be the rulers. So this means that kings are chosen by God to rule the people, which also means that rebelling against the king or against the monarch is a sin, not just against the state, not against the country, but also against heaven itself, because you are disagreeing with God and who God appointed as a person to rule over people on earth. So yeah, you can see God's appointed deputy on earth with semi-divine powers. Now, this means that even if the king, you don't agree with, the king's methods, if he's taxing you too hard, if he's sending you to war, if he's not helping you, nonetheless, you can't disagree and you can't change it, because to do so would be going against God's will. This does have another side of it, which is, of course, the king has a moral responsibility to God and to his people. He is expected to rule wisely, to rule with God's wisdom. And the idea is that if the king ever stopped doing this, then God would see fit to remove the king. But that still, it's not up to the people to be able to say who should or who shouldn't be king or queen. It has to be God's decision. Okay, now understanding these two concepts is quite important, because lots of Shakespeare's plays deal with monarchy, deal with aristocracy, or certainly deal with hierarchy. So if you have any plays which deal with hierarchy or religion, like Measure for Measure, then understanding the great chain of being is useful for analysing there. If you're dealing with a play to do with the monarchy, like King Lear or Macbeth is a good example, then understanding the divine right of kings is really important. Now, Macbeth is a good example because in Macbeth, Macbeth kills the current king, he kills Duncan, and this sets off a chain reaction of negative events, and it disrupts the natural order and the order of the world that Macbeth lives in. Animals start to go crazy. There's two horses that eat each other. There's an owl who is killed by a mouse. And these are all reflections of how the natural order begins to break down in Macbeth because Macbeth kills the king. He kills Duncan, and that upsets the great chain of being. Okay, so there should be kind of like a cyclical structure to it. Now, everybody looks after the king, and the king looks after everybody. But when that structure is disrupted, then the entire natural order is disrupted. Okay, and here you have an image. This is of King Louis XIV of France. It's just to demonstrate how in art as well, kings and queens are shown to be religiously inspired, to be divinely chosen by God. Okay, so let's move on. We've only got a few key ideas left. So here are key ideas you should be aware of for Shakespeare's culture. Now, I know we've already touched on this first one at the start of the lesson, but I would say it's probably one of the more important ones, so it bears repeating. So often as an English teacher, I've had to correct students' work where they talk about the wrong kind of audience. You want to make sure that you're talking about the right kind of audience. So if your play is set in this time period, or if it was written in this time period, then it is an Elizabethan audience. If it is written in this time period, it is for a Jacobean audience. If you're not sure, you can just look up Google when were Shakespeare's plays written. It'll come up with a whole list of them. Find your play, find the time period, and then match it up with this, and then you know. Now, that's all well and good, understanding the difference between an Elizabethan and a Jacobean audience. But what difference does it make? Being able to reference it is great, but how could you use that then to talk about the historical culture, the historical context of, you know, which king or which monarch, sorry, is ruling at the time? How can you use that to talk about it in your analysis? Well, here are 2 key points for talking about if it's set during the Elizabethan era, 2 key points for talking about if it is set during the Jacobean audience. So, Queen Elizabeth ruled only over England, so the yellow section on the map, whereas when King James ascended the throne, there was a unification of England and Scotland. These two became one country. So you can see this in Macbeth, because Macbeth is set as a play during the Jacobean era, and Macbeth is talking about how a Scottish general goes crazy and you know, kills the King of Scotland, and then it's only with aid from England, so Malcolm, Duncan's son, the prince, who runs away to England and then comes back with an army of English people and then becomes the ruler of Scotland. So it's kind of like Macbeth almost gives you a nice story for the unification of England and Scotland, that England came to Scotland's rescue and stopped a rogue Scottish general from destroying the land. Okay, the Elizabethan era is very prosperous, it's very rich, it's regarded as a golden age of British history. So to give an example, Sir Walter Raleigh is one of the, or Drake would be another famous example, both explorers. So Walter Raleigh colonized parts of America and came back with things like coffee and spices and potatoes, famously. So the Elizabethan era was very rich and people were expanding and exploring new islands, whereas the Jacobean era wasn't as prosperous due to debt, so it's a little bit more dour and perhaps also a little bit more religious and Puritan as well. During both eras, though, people strongly believed in the supernatural, whereas King James I ordered a witch hunt on an unprecedented scale. He tried to have as many witches killed as possible. And you can see this in things like Macbeth as well, written during the Jacobean era. And lastly, this is a point that we've just mentioned. Although Queen Elizabeth sent many expeditions to different countries and different islands, most of the actual colonization and setting up colonies there took place during the Jacobean era. And here you have an example of the witch hunt. So a trial of witches. This was actually in London, where they were trying witches for their crimes, or their supposed crimes. So just a few key ideas to reference, whether it is Jacobean or Elizabethan, so that you can understand a bit more about the historical context of the play. Okay, now we've actually finished a good bit early. We have about 8 minutes left, so we have some good time for questions. If you have any particular questions that you'd like to ask, then please feel free to put them in the chat and I can go through them. If you don't have any questions, that's absolutely fine as well, and we can just finish early. But if you have found this lesson useful, if you are interested in a free one-to-one assessment and further lessons if you would like, please feel free to contact Chan and she'll be able to arrange that for you. If you also would like to have these slides from this masterclass, or you would like any other resources for Shakespeare, you can visit our website and sign up to our newsletter. Visit our website, you'll find them all available for download on our website in the articles or in the resources section. And at the same time, you could sign up to our website, to our newsletter, if you would like to stay up to date with any future resources that we publish or any other education news that we publish that becomes available. So before we finish though, if you have any questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat. You can visit the chat in Zoom by checking the bottom of the screen. You should see that there is a chat function to be able to share questions. Let's see. Oh, no, we don't, unfortunately. For some reason, it has not been enabled on this meeting, which is a bit of a shame. So in that case, since we still have another 6 minutes left, what I would say is if you do have a question, I'm more than happy to answer it and discuss in however is helpful. Just unmute yourself on your laptop. You'll see that at the bottom of the screen there is a mute button in the bottom left-hand corner. You can click that and you can unmute yourself. And feel free to ask any questions that you have, or if there's any other information you're interested in for Shakespeare, please do ask. Okay, well, it looks like in that case, nobody has any questions, which is absolutely fine. If you do think of something later, you can just WeChat Chan and she will message me and I will get back to you on Monday. Any questions at all, absolutely fine. If you're looking for guidance on how to revise Shakespeare further, or if you have any particular questions relevant to the play that you're studying, please feel free to ask. Okay, in that case, I'm going to end the lesson there. 5 minutes early, but I think we've covered all the key details to go through in any case. So have a great weekend, everybody, and I look forward to our next free debate masterclass. Speak soon. Bye.